Hey, everybody. Welcome to Connecting in Commotion. This is the podcast where we dive deep into human connection in a world that's very chaotic, especially in 2024. So, we're going to share some insights, some conversations, thinkers, creators, quotes, go deep, have fun while we're doing it. I'm your co host, Connor Mears. You can follow me on X at Connor J. Mears. And this is my co host. Shout out.
Vince Botto Jr. And you can follow me on X, Twitter, or Instagram at Vince Botto Jr. And it's exciting to kind of start this journey and really begin connecting in commotion, just hopefully empowering more broadly across the scales.
That's right. So today, we're just going to kind of introduce ourselves, get to know each other, say hello to the world, and start to feel our way around about what this podcast is going to be about, and look at some of the topics that are near and dear to our hearts. I think that's kind of a good game plan here to feel our way through the darkness to start out.
Sounds like a plan to me.
So, a little bit about us. I'm a licensed psychotherapist based out of Pennsylvania, have some roots in New Jersey and Florida as well. Shout out to all my people, you know who you are. Very interested in digital health, what I call digital health, which is how do we live in a world with technology when we're primates, to put it simply. Because it's a simple way of saying why we're here in the current struggle that we're in, and how we've lost connection to each other, to ourselves, to living authentically in so many different arenas.
Couldn't agree more. And connecting emotion is really going to kind of strive on that digital health, as you said, and just excited. I'm Vince Botto again, licensed therapist as well, based in New Jersey. I also am in training for an addictions and alcohol drug counseling license, on top of, say, international gambling license as well, which is intertwined with digital health and kind of the issues we're facing in an intersection. Also, I'm a personal trainer and finishing up yoga teacher training, and really just kind of getting that journey into holistic health to kind of build deeper connection with the mind, body, and spirit, and also our gut, where in reality, digital health, it ties into that, because in reality, stress, ourselves, holistically, all are intertwined.
Love that. He's a true Renaissance man, ladies and gentlemen, if you couldn't get that already. When you said the gut, I was reminded of I saw was he, I'm not sure if he was a medical intern, but he had a whole thread about mitochondria and the sort of new frontiers of research about the cellular and metabolic origins of mental health dysfunction. And I couldn't help myself, Vince. I had to respond. The mitochondria is the powerhouse of the self.
Can I just say, I saw the tweet. I liked it. I didn't get to read it yet, or X, whatever the hell it's called now. But the idea,
Yeah.
I loved it. Ironically,
Yeah.
I took a training today on resistance adolescents and kind of how to engage them in treatment and overall kind of like discuss with them. And heavily in that CEU was the discussion kind of around epigenetics and genetics, which was ironic that you're bringing up the mitochondria too.
Yeah. So that is definitely such an interesting frontier of trying to put all these puzzle pieces together, like even kind of how you're approaching treatment from all these different angles, sort of spiritual, somatic, right, biological, personal training, right, so exercise, which is of course behaviors, but it's increasingly becoming this puzzle piece where we need to have some sort of cross-disciplinary investigations, collaboration, right? Because yes, mitochondria, I'm sure, are extremely important, and metabolic dysfunction are probably extremely important. What does that tell us about how to solve behavioral problems? I don't know. Is it gene therapy? Are people ready for gene therapy?
No.
Is anyone ready for that?
To say bluntly, no.
Is anyone ready for gene therapy? Hey, you have this metabolic dysfunction that is linked to bipolar disease. Would you like a pill?
And ironically, that the woman who led the CU, I don't have her name off the top of my head, but she is a lecturer at Harvard, she said, and she supposedly wrote a study for them on regards to this in adolescent health. And it's kind of hitting on what you're saying, right? Like THC right now, high potency, we are recognizing actually is causing epigenetic changes to teenagers
Right.
psychotically. And
Yep.
it's really interesting because it's exactly what you're saying, where they're
Mhm.
predisposed at a point that typically never would have happened until
Sure.
kind of this mass manufacturing and high potency level of cannabis began.
Totally. Totally. I had even, I had a friend in college who, amongst other things, but it was with the concentrated THC now, not just flower, but in concentrates, it's becoming such a problem. And watching him have a psychotic episode in response to his substance use was very shocking. Not that it's anything new or that cannabis hasn't always sort of been a risk factor for, sort of bipolar, schizophrenia, and psychotic related disorders, but um, I can understand the urgency as in it seems like in very different arenas we have this sort of dopamine capitalism all
Yeah.
racing, so like social media, like let's make the most addicting apps. Well, we can't make it less addicting because someone else will, and then we get, okay, well, here's the highest THC cannabis. Well, if I don't make the highest THC cannabis, someone else will. Right? We
I'm just
keep
gonna.
find keep running we keep running into the same wall.
Oh, are we running into the same wall, or is it just more so we're not making sure the wall actually doesn't get built?
Right, right, fair enough. Yeah. Yeah.
I
I think
ironically,
go
I
ahead.
cut you off real quick,
Yeah, yeah, go ahead.
only because I looked it up because earlier I forget when I heard it, and you're hitting on it.
Yeah.
Sean Parker, we all know who that is.
Actually, I don't know if I'm familiar. Sean Parker sounds familiar, but I don't know his work.
You ever seen The Social Network?
Oh yeah. I thought what is the name of, see now I'm drawing blank. I have seen a social network, yep.
It's Justin Timberlake. That's Sean Parker, the guy who started Napster, right? He was kind of you could also
Right.
say he was a big architect for Facebook and kind of developing them into the business model they are today. And also just the idea of making Zuckerberg into understanding kind of the ruthlessness
Right.
of our system.
Right.
Now, it's ironic because the quote he has, which it's funny because you hit on this idea of dopamine hacking or
Right.
kind of like understanding like this is what we're targeting. It comes from a quote from him, and this is like back in the day when it was like Facebook being built, and it's the thought process that went into building these applications, Facebook being the first of them, was all about how do we consume as much of your time and consciousness attention as possible. And that means that we need to sort of give you a little dopamine hit every once in a while because someone liked a comment on a photo or a post or whatever. And that's going to get to contribute more content. And that's going to get you more likes and more comments. It's social validation feedback loop. More likes and comments. My bad. I screwed it up. It's a
You're
social
doing great.
validation. Thank you. Social validation. Yes. Feedback loop, exactly the kind of thing that a hacker like myself would come up with because you're exploiting a vulnerability of human psychology.
Right.
The inventors, creators, it's me. It's Mark Zuckerberg. It's Kevin Systrom on Instagram. It's all these people understood this consciously. And it's why we did it anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, well, you could think of it as in so much where, as sort of the general well-being of the modern human society, at least in the West, has grown, right? We've had all this surplus that needs to be thrown down the drain somewhere. And so they're like, yeah, let's hack that. It's reminiscent of, I forget which food that's terrible for you it is. I think it was maybe Coca-Cola. But I remember a ways back there from a, some kind of TED talk or some expose where they were talking about like, well, their idea was instead of how much attention, right, can we garner, it was how much stomach share can we garner, right? Like people can only eat so much. How do we conquer stomach share? right? So there's still this idea of like, maximizing, right? And especially things that are consumed, we find this mentality everywhere of where's the limit, and trying to cap that. And I think we can only obviously rely on consumers changing their behavior in our current socio-political state.
Ooh, you dropped a hard, I see what you did there.
Right. But
First episode,
yeah,
avoid.
right. And I'm gone. Yeah. Yeah, but it's hard, man. It's hard because I think we're starting to see, like, I think it's becoming a more like commonsensical, intuitive thing that we can all see happening before our eyes. Like, oh, the internet is doing things to us. Like, it's become pretty obvious, but there are still the people who are like, it's a moral panic. Like, this
Yeah.
is what. There are the moral panic. What would you say, defenders who will die on that hill. I see them all the time. Anyway.
I would 2 points. You're hitting on this idea a guy named Michael Pollan talks about a lot in his books, and it's really like one of his books is like the defense of food, and like one of the arguments he creates in a lot of his books is this idea that really it comes down to we just understood again how to biohack now instead of hacked our psychology, it's hacking our gut and it's hacking our mitochondria or our
Right.
cellular structure, and arguably that's part of what he did, and there's another book. I can't remember the name off the top of my head by Naomi Oreskes, and she's a Harvard researcher and has quite phenomenal work. And like that's one of the books too. It is a oncology research study just showing the kind of foundation of corporate America recognizing, holy shit, we can make food more addictive legally. We're not even doing
Mm,
anything weird. It's just creating more dopamine hits, like you said. And like
yeah.
a
It's
second
it's
point.
Go ahead, go ahead.
Okay,
Sorry.
no, no. I honestly, I just forgot. It's okay.
I was gonna say, like, we've almost become sort of we're at such a day and age where what is like food is completely redefined, and like people like the Gen Alphas, like the generation after Gen Z, like they're growing up and they see what a supermarket is and they think that like
Yeah.
that's normal, right? So it's this constant cycle of like, well, but it's food because it's in a grocery store, right? That must mean it's fine, right? There's no warning labels. There's no warning labels, at the when you're walking down each aisle or on the shelf. Um,
Oh, you brought up an interesting point now.
yeah,
So, like, I remember the second point. It ties into kind of what you're talking about. Even if we think of like technology curves,
yeah,
did like the internet's just another technology, and like we can look at maybe other process addictions and kind of their evolution too. If we think about it, like gambling, it's always probably had problems, but there was real consequences, and when we lifted those consequences to more of like only financial consequences, problems began.
yeah,
If we think about food, we can kind of tie, or even the idea of dopamine hits when it comes to screens or food. It's probably similar to, say, something like cigarettes, where they were legal and tobacco was legal for hundreds of years prior to kind of the commercialization of it, and then it became a problem.
right, right. And it's also when the sort of cost of when it becomes so when it's trying to be capitalized on, right? It eventually got to the point where like the cigarette you were smoking was not tobacco in paper. It wasn't that, and not that that's great either, right? But it's better than what it became. So,
Exactly.
so
It, but I'm gonna tie it in. This is the point you kind of led to, right? That
sure.
consumers just dictate this.
Yeah.
Is that totally true then? Only because we're kind of hitting on the idea that that's not true with cigarettes, at least.
What do you mean? Sorry, I'm missing.
If we put the responsibility only on the consumer to change the system, that's also like, in some sense unfair because
Oh,
historically
of
that's
course.
not how it's been.
Right, right. I'm not saying that there shouldn't be uh, corporate accountability to regulation. I'm more saying like as our best bet is to help people change, which is why I'm a therapist, right? I guess.
Oh, agreed.
Right. So it's kind of like that, coming at it from both sides. It's not that I don't think that, it's more like I'm not going to hold my breath. I'm gonna try and help people do the things without the, take mastery over themselves as it stands, right? Um, while hoping that the change is made, if that makes sense, as a distinction from maybe how it came across prior.
No, look, fair enough. That definitely broadens kind of that point, and it just seems interesting. These are like it's like when is the point that we recognize, in some sense, the idiocracy cycle kind of takes over if we
Sure.
don't do the other side.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
I hate to say it that way, but in some sense,
Yeah.
that's how I'm thinking about it.
So true. Well, so like, I guess what becomes really interesting is like, to what degree are you even allowed to advertise, right? Because you could even imagine that's a scale, right? Like, advertising itself is a form of influence, right? Like, so we can all kind of agree that like you should be allowed to have some level of persuasion in business, right? In marketing and advertising. But where is the line? Like, how far is it till it tips the scale from, okay, you're trying to sell a product, to you're manipulating people.
Like Tom
You're
Brady telling you gambling's not dangerous because you get your
right,
buyback
right,
reward.
right, exactly. Like, like how, like, it's almost like this thing, right? We do, yeah, like a FanDuel advertisement, right? Nothing against FanDuel. I could throw in anybody else, DraftKings and the whole lot of them, right? MGM, like we can go down the list, but, they have a giant in the commercial, right? And then there's like two sentences right at the bottom, like three size font disclaimer, right? No one's reading that. No one can read
Yep.
that. Like, is that a legitimate disclaimer? It's like, gambling problem, 1-800-GAMBLER. It's like, all right, back to your regular scheduled program. It's like, I understand that there's real constraints, but I think the hard part is that we know that there's a line that needs to be drawn somewhere on the spectrum of like persuasion, and like how much persuasion is allowed before it becomes manipulative, before it becomes sort of engineered in a way that's detrimental to human beings, right? And I don't know who is qualified to draw that line or where it should be drawn, but it's an interesting question.
It is an interesting question, and I'm gonna assume that we could probably take just history lesson, right? Because we did it, say, with gambling. I mean, we did it with we did it with gambling, honestly, before we made it completely legal, right? Like that was
Right,
kind of part of how it was beforehand. That say
right,
state like places like Las Vegas, NAC had to market specifically around gambling, and kind
sure,
of how they tried convincing people to come. If we look at smoking, right, like that is
right,
probably the biggest tie-in. We even have prohibition technically in the United States.
right,
We could look at and be like, oh, look, another one.
right,
And I guess just to further the point about marketing, not to shit on any marketers here, or
right,
who created marketing?
right.
Was it specific people who did horrible things to convince the population that they weren't doing horrible things? Just throw that one out there, right? Like,
Right, sure.
making sure we all understand marketing is a form of persuasion just in the heart of it. Because the
Right,
idea is you're making sure that somebody thinks they need something when they probably don't.
right.
If they need it, they're going to look.
Yeah, yeah. And I think where the rubber meets the road too is the understanding of like, one of the answers is like teach media literacy, right? There is a
Yeah.
line somewhere that we have to find, right? Then there's media literacy slash like understanding marketing and advertising from the consumer
Yeah.
side, right? Um, you know, but but further than that, right? There's a subset of vulnerable population that you could probably draw somewhere, below, like at, like, I don't know, one standard deviation below average IQ, and say
Mm-hmm.
those people don't stand a chance, right?
True.
And then you're like, okay, well, we can't just abandon those people. Like, we can't just like let them be fed to corporate wolves. Um, but that's what happens.
Oh, absolutely. And like tying it in, right? If we think smoking, we know one thing that technically was lifted, say, from a marketing perspective. And like historically, if we think about it, we can all pull up an image of John Wayne holding camels. And
Sure.
like talking about like, if you smoke these, you're really cool or you're a man,
Right.
right? Like
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You're a
in some
cowboy.
sense, Exactly.
Yeah.
You want to live in the Wild Wild West? Camel, right? Like
Yeah. Yeah.
that was something we recognized was a form of persuasion because you're trying to become maybe your hero while your hero was telling you to be basically addicted to something.
Sure. Yeah.
Now, to counter that, right? Like that is kind of the point. Like it's a slippery slope, but yeah, there is going to be middle ground that we can all kind of agree on.
Sure. Yeah. Well, and even now, smoking, like I'm so curious. I haven't really dug into the literature yet, but they did. The persuasive marketers are back at it again because they made nicotine cool again, right? Everyone's vaping, everyone's, all of a sudden it's cool again, right? Well, I'm not lighting anything on fire with a lighter, right? No Zippos coming out of the pocket. I'm not lighting anything up with matches. There's just a battery in here that's sparking up some some salt nicotine fluid. Right? That's it. That's it. It's fine.
No big deal.
No big deal.
It
This will
was
have
funny.
zero consequences.
Well, something funny in that CEU I did today, right? And for anyone who's not a therapist or in the mental health or like say licensing requirements for anything, CEUs are continuing education units that you have to continue to get a certain amount every couple or in New
Yep.
Jersey at least every 2 years to maintain a license. For
Yep.
personal
Same
training,
in
it's every 2 years
Pennsylvania.
as well.
Mhm.
Same in Pennsylvania. And kind of that CU, right, in that conversation. That was actually one of the things she said for resisting adolescence, which is a lot since COVID, right? The numbers have
Yeah.
skyrocketed on that for school avoidance just in general. And that was one thing she just said. Bring the science in, right? If
Sure.
you have a 17 or 16-year-old, bring in the science when they're smoking those vape cartridges. It was just like, hey, you're playing Russian roulette with your brain. Good luck.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
like, just
Yeah.
be blunt about it.
Totally. And it goes back to, right, like, I mean, we kind of understand that it's almost reminiscent of like so many different things of like even one of them that reminds me of like, well, should nicotine itself be legal, right? Should, these things be legal? And then we're like, well, prohibition doesn't exactly help anyway,
Yeah.
right? We've done some of those experiments, so let's try and, keep it legal and regulate it so at least people are getting what they sign up for, but keep them informed, right? The problem is, I don't know how well we hold up our bargain with keeping them informed and regulating those things. So, so then it just becomes, okay, well, oops. But yeah, I think with the vape thing, it's really gonna be bad. I think it's gonna have another wave. We're gonna have another wave in like the next 20 years of sort of lung, throat, mouth cancers, um, that is going to be really sad to watch in general. When people realize that it wasn't much different. Um, I don't know. That's just my guess. It feels intuitively that way, and on the limited research that I have seen, it seems like it will be that way. But I don't know. It's still so new.
I wish I should have saved this like thing. I saw someone post the other day. I can't even remember what social platform it was on because I think I saved it. So I literally just don't remember. Damn you, ADHD. And it was just this like person who was just all they did every year. They gather all the current data showing essentially like all the adolescent kind of, you could say, issues today because essentially there's a bunch of them. And like it was obesity was like 40% of adolescents.
Wow.
And just to your point of like, just now imagine if they're using a vape. It's like that person's
Yeah.
cutting 20 years off their life probably before
Yeah.
they're even reaching 20 years old.
Sure. At least it's at the point where they're sort of more resilient. I mean, it's developmentally impacting them, right? But
Are they
they
more
have a
resilient though?
they have a lot of years to quit and to let their body recover. Basically, is more what I'm saying.
Well, absolutely true. Right?
Yeah.
Like the problem I think we're all hitting on though, like and like we're kind of hitting on this conversation. We can just keep adding in those comorbid type of symptomologies, and what's going to happen?
Right.
Can the brain actually recover? And this is now a
Right.
question we probably don't know, right? Because what is it? I'm on chapter now 4 of Anxious Generation. I know you've read it. It's in the background,
Shout
right?
out.
And well, I'm reading it, right? Like, you're such a big proponent. And it's something Jonathan I brings up, right? Like that, like episode, I think it was chapter 3, he talked about this idea of just the long-term consequences of how the brain is going to
Yeah.
be affected.
Sure.
And it might say take a decade for someone to recover.
Yeah.
Now, what we're missing in that point is the societal effects of if a decade for a generation is taken away and it has to recover or not do as much compulsivity and impulsivity because the brain's all effed up.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, I think what is interesting is like how this is going to interact. It seems very unrelated, but I'll try and do my best to how
Guide it.
my
Just go for it.
very 10,000 foot conceptual brain is trying to tie this together. I think it's going to be really interesting that generation coming of age in the dawn of AI, because I think it's almost like we're outsourcing thinking to AI, and
Yeah.
it's almost like if they have that impulsivity, compulsivity, they don't have the critical thinking skills, they don't have the attention spans, but they have ChatGPT. So like in a sense, they're like you can kind of plug that hole with you know artificial intelligence. Like we're literally replacing sort of what would you say organic intelligence with artificial intelligence. Like if you think about it as like this generation has this gap in executive functioning, and critical thinking ability, and then we're just like, well, I guess we can just throw an AI band-aid on that and call it a day. Does
No
that make
child left
sense?
behind. AI.
Yeah, exactly. Oh man, dude.
But you're not wrong. Like
Yeah,
this is that intersectionality if we think about when it comes to just this generation that they're going to get stuck with.
yeah.
Do they
Well,
actually even recover with the ability to just mask it?
yeah. I don't know. Like I was so this I've been trying to work my way through this one. This is Generations by Jean Twenge.
Ooh, okay.
So real differences between all the generations alive today. I'm not really going to go through the whole thing, but
Feel free.
the
I'm looking at it
the
on Amazon.
interesting the interesting part about it is I've only read the first couple chapters, but she basically goes through and outlines sort of okay, what are some of the previous theories about why the different generations have different
Wait,
properties, right?
these effing headphones died on me, bro.
Oh no, no, no. Well, I can still hear you. Can you hear me?
We're coming through,
All right, all right.
First
Are
episode.
you back? Cool. Let's go.
We're back.
Nice. So she kind of debunks some of the other theories that people have about what defines generations or gives them the sort of on average qualities that they have. One of them I remember being like, big events like 9/11 or Watergate, for example. But what she winds up showing is that it's actually about technology, right? So it's actually about, okay, technological advancement, which facilitates a move away from shared culture to individualistic tendencies, right? So I was having this conversation the other day with somebody where we were talking about this, and I was basically saying, like, listen, when maybe Gen X, right, was in high school, they'd all be listening, like the same album came out that week, and everyone listened to that album. Right? Everyone was getting that album, everyone was getting that record, everyone was playing it, was on the radio, right? It was this milieu where everyone was connected.
Fair enough.
Now, right, a Gen Z's in high school, the odds that and the student next to them in the hallway is listening to a song they've ever heard of before or a podcast that with hosts that they've ever heard of before is near zero, right?
Yeah.
It's like people are living in completely different worlds, right? Like I have my world in here, you have your world in your phone, right? Everybody has all these different worlds. So her point was kind of like, as technology has progressed, what the differences in the generations actually come down to is this shift from sort of more rigid collectivist culture and values, right? Slowly trickling down, technology mediating the ability for more individualistic expression, but it's also drawing people apart. And she's actually very good. She makes very little value judgments. So I think she does a really good job of trying to cut through it without sort of getting moralistic or trying to
Mm-hmm.
put any sort of opinion on it. She's just kind of like, this is just what it says. I will say I have trouble with it though, because a lot of graphs, it's kind of dry in a certain sense, but it's packed. I mean, it's packed with information and it's really scientifically sound. I think the data set that she uses is like millions of people. I forget where she gets it from. These like cultural surveys, but they're really big sample size. You know, really in-depth analyses of the differences. But I thought it was interesting that like even thinking about and so sorry, the whole reason I brought this up was because right, she has a cutoff for Gen Z at 1996,
Okay.
which is the year I was born. So I was like, I feel like I've always felt like I'm too old to be a Gen Z and too young to be a millennial. I just feel caught right in the middle.
We don't accept
So
you.
yeah, it's okay. But like at least I was able to swallow it a little bit better after reading her explanation. She just made the cutoff kind of, I think it was when um, people who were in middle school when like 4G, was it 4G, 3G or 4G, like some level of internet came out, slash like how old were you when like Facebook kind of went viral for kids. Um,
Ah.
right. So
So
like
really just setting the paradigm at the literal textual shift.
right, right. And so people who had that technology in middle school versus people who didn't was really the shift that she did. But I was like the first like year of people who had it in middle school, right, versus people who had it in high school. So that's why I kind of fall, I guess, into the first of the Gen Zs. So I'm a trailblazer and I'm hopelessly confused.
I won't lie. Like thinking just in my own even personal life, right? Because we have an age difference,
Right.
and I can say I literally don't remember when Facebook came out for me, but if I think about it, it was what 2008. It gets popular in probably 2010, so I was probably a junior in high school. Whereas, like,
Right.
yeah, I could not imagine having that shit when I was in
Right.
eighth grade.
Right.
I can
Exactly.
remember what I was doing in eighth grade.
Right,
It was
2010.
horrifying.
Yeah, exactly. It's like 2010 is kind of that shift. I would say that's a good, I don't know the exact age he uses, but it's right around then. And so in 2010, right, I graduated high school in 2015. So if I go back to 5 years from then, yeah, I was probably in eighth grade or seventh or eighth grade.
Yeah,
So
I was
yeah,
2011, so that would make complete sense.
yeah.
And
Whew.
like to that point, like I can vividly remember being say in eighth grade. So seventh grade, I vividly remember. I remember getting my second cell phone. It was a Sprint phone that flipped open with a camera that went back and forth. It was the dopest thing in the
It
world
was
because I had like
epic. Yeah.
right. I had a selfie
Uh,
friggin'
I
and
remember
like
I got, dude, I had this, it was called the Alias. I don't know if you remember these. So it slid up, like, so it
oh
slid up like
yeah.
this, and you would type, and then it also flipped open. It flipped open both ways, and it would just was attached by a little joint at the corner, and so you could flip it open this way or this way. And I was like, oh, I can be cool like this or cool like this, like, and it was great. Man.
I guess a question for you would be: have you switched to a non-smartphone since having one?
I've I've tried to convince myself that I should do it, and I just can't. But I have, over the last 8 months, I have made a lot of efforts to change my relationship to my phone and technology. And I've read the book Dopamine Nation by Anna
Mm-hmm.
Lemke. Great book. And I don't really remember the exact sort of strategies that she talks about. It is about sort of technology, but it's more about just in general your relationship to dopamine, to pleasure, to gratification, etc. But the thing that helped me was she had a whole section on this term called self-binding. Um, and I just thought it was a useful sort of paradigm to think about and then to just like apply it to different things. The idea is don't rely on yourself to not be a dopamine seeking insatiable wretch, basically. Right? Don't think that you're smarter than dopamine. Don't think it, because it's not true. So what you have to do is you have to bind yourself. You have to literally put up physical, emotional, temporal barriers around yourself. So like things that I've done, right, is my phone, tap it, doesn't wake up. I have to use the lock button.
Hmm.
I have to use the lock button. But I've done all these little layers that have drastically changed how much I pick it up, how much I use it, how much I get distracted when I'm on it from the thing that I initially intended to open my phone for. Right?
Ooh.
So like I've it's not that I'm trying to make my phone dumber instead of just getting a dumber phone kind of deal, right? I guess it's kind of the point. Like I basically deleted all my apps. Like I have my four main home apps, right? And then I have like, oh crap. And then I have like one box of other apps at the top and like my calendar.
We're
So
all
that's
learning
it.
why Connor does not respond to text or Snapchats forever.
Exactly, exactly. Especially Snapchat, because Snapchat is like one I have to like remember. I'm like every 3 weeks, I'm like, I haven't been on
Oh,
Snapchat in a month.
you don't
And the,
say.
yeah, and I respond to people like, I don't remember what I sent you. Piss off. But you know, it is what it is. Like it's hard for me to get the good without the bad, and I think for some people it's easier. I think in general, I have some of the risk factors that Maya Spalitz, I'm going to try and pronounce her name, talked about in Unbroken Brain, right? Some of the impulsivity, sensation seeking, right? I think I have a high level of neuroticism, so I have these risk factors for for externalizing issues, let's just say, and so I've tried to battle against that by just being very vigilant about how I do it and because it's sort of necessary for me, but I think there are plenty of people who don't need to do that. I just need to do that. So although I think it's wise that people reflect on how much time they spend, how they use it, how much they're getting distracted, how it might be impacting their ability to concentrate, their ability
Yeah.
to execute their life effectively, and like have those reflections for sure. But everybody's way of doing it is going to look a little bit different.
No, I love that. Thank you for sharing. And like, of course, Dopamine Nation's definitely on the list after like you just kind of walking me through it a little
Yeah.
bit. Like, oh, it's exciting.
She's got some pretty extreme examples in that book, but I think that they're really helpful um, because they're extreme, right?
Yeah.
Um, because it's like one of those. Um, I struggle, and I still haven't really come to this. Is I'm going to pivot here, but it's still in the same domain, right? So I struggle to define. I'm sure you remember in our drug and alcohol class in graduate school when we had sort of debates about to what extent is addiction a disease, right?
Hmm.
Um, right. And so there's the disease model, right? There's these different models of how to think about addiction. And so I really struggle with it because what I was going to say was I think one of the reasons that using extreme examples in dopamination and books is helpful because it's almost easier to understand when it's illustrated by sort of the endpoints of the spectrum, right? Like when you go to the extremes, it makes it very easy to comprehend, and then you can scale it back to like, okay, how is that mechanism working in my life, right? I think she does a really good job actually making it as just a science communicator for lay people. I think she's got some really fun metaphors in there for the dopamine system and illustrations that make it very, very easy to understand for most people who would pick up such a book anyway, right?
Oh,
um,
fair enough.
so, but to go back to that idea of addiction as a disease, I struggle with that because I think to for all the same caveats that we debated way back, it's like on the one hand, right? It seems like there are certain people who have uh, neurological dispositions and structures that have gotten to the point where they're unable to regulate themselves with highly rewarding chemicals and behaviors. Seems like it on the outside looking in, right? But it's that idea of like, well, if you just define it as a disease because it gives people sort of relief and reduces stigma for treatment, um, then it's the self-fulfilling prophecy of like, okay, you're saying that someone who, had got too deep into it, right, can never go back, right? Can never be California sober, let's say, right? If they had gotten into some sort of mess with prescription medication from a pain surgery or what have you. Okay, so now they can never, now they must live their life as a sober Sally forever.
Yeah.
It's like, that's a really difficult posture to maintain, and one that is only going to breed shame and guilt for, having a beer.
I
It's
totally agree
tough.
with you. You
Yeah.
know, and to that point, right? Like like that idea of the disease model. I
Yeah.
personally, I don't agree with it at all, and it's only
Yeah.
just because I look at it from, say, more of a philosophical idea, like so, like a
Right.
paradigm. I look at it as the old paradigm. That is like before we basically had neuroscience.
Right.
And
Right.
like we kind of had neuroscience, but did we have neuroimaging on the level we have it today? No. Did we
Right.
understand genetics at that point? Not really. Right? And
Yeah.
it's one of those things, it's that old past almost still in the present that doesn't make
Right.
sense, which I'm assuming that book Generations kind of hit on that way.
Right.
Gen X talking to their parents or Gen X talking to their Gen Z kids, it's like, no, they don't understand anything that you're going through. We're like,
Right.
they
Right.
can't.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so true. It's such a just a different reality. Um, one thing that one way I try and think about it is I try and think about it as like a graph where on the y-axis is your degree of choice, and the x-axis is the number of times that you use, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's a -1 correlation. So each time
Sure.
you use, you lose less. What would you say? Less space on the lever of your will when you're
Oh,
presented with the opportunity to use. Does that make sense?
I like that. I
Yeah,
like that.
yeah.
I totally get
So
it.
yeah, so I've drawn this graph out for people before, and I've just been like, okay, so each time you make a choice to use, right? You lose a little bit of choice next time, right? And so like it's not an addiction. You still have all these choices, but I think it's almost like a pseudo addiction model, because it's like once you get down here, right, there is a point where you reach almost no choice, right? You know. And so that I think that is what the addiction model is trying to say. Is like you can find yourself in such a uh, dopamine or just neurochemical deficit state that is so unbelievably painful that you have basically next to no choice, right? I think that is kind of like the basis of the disease model in a certain sense. Um, but I fail to see how that connection then says, well, once you're sort of once your brain is rehabilitated back to a healthy baseline, why can you not, just because you went to that place one time means that you're bound to go back there again? I mean, I think obviously you need to look at the risk factors of why you got there, right? Important, non-negligible things, right? Yeah, it's not just like, oh, thank God, I'm back to baseline. Time to hit the bottle again, baby. No, we're not doing that, but you know,
I yeah, I'll hop in right there. Right, like the I think we talked about when we were in grad school, Jonah Hari's Lost Connections book. Do you remember
Mhm.
hearing about that one?
I haven't. I've heard of it. I haven't read it.
And like perfect, right? Like, so like there's a part in there that he is hitting on exactly this, right? Like the idea that typically in many other cultures around the world, more Eastern, you would say, drug addiction's not as high. It's a
Right.
disease of despair too, which is how we
Right.
used to look at it. We didn't look at it as this kind of moral dilemma that an individual didn't, you chose your future, and like now it's your fault. And that's more
Right.
of that moral dilemma shame kind of model that we think Western, more Anglo-Saxon people all kind of follow from a religious or
Right.
theological kind of framework, compared to say Eastern, where it's a little more say go with the flow nature, where it's like, yeah, of course you're using a drug because the function of the drug is to relieve suffering, and you're suffering.
Sure. Yeah, there's that's the sort of pseudo Puritan like implicit belief about it, no matter that is like underneath it all. It's like reminiscent of like, well, we can all see someone who is too far gone in heroin or fentanyl addiction that they're folding over on the street and be like, that's a bad thing, right? We can all say that, but again, it's that this spectrum problem of like where is this line of uh, sort of escapism that's healthy, right?
Yeah.
Where you're able to incorporate things into your life without elevating them to an importance where they don't belong.
Oof. I would make the argument just from that idea, it's impossible, right? And it's
Right.
more so because that's biologically kind of how we operate. Like if you hack
Right.
the system, kind of like that Sean Poker, or even the idea we were talking about when it comes to human psychology and dopamine, you can't unavoid the fact that you can just abuse something. But at the same time, it's like you said, how do we find a healthy balance? I don't know. Arguably, a lot of times, like Jonah Hari would make the argument that it's about meaning and purpose, right? So
Right.
if you aren't filling that void, of course you're suffering because your humanity is part of you. Thus, you need
Right.
to be fulfilling it.
Right. Yeah, it's like that idea of uh, what's the telos of your use? Is the telos of your use to what is its design, right? Makes
Yep.
all the difference. Is it used to procrastinate? Is it used because you have failing relationships? Is it used because um, your family's broken? Is it used because X, because you are not willing to put in the work to change your life? I don't know. Not that that's a case of will always, right? Sometimes it is. Um, hmm,
Yeah. And even like that idea, like, or is it, are you just dead broke? You have no job opportunities. You were on drugs. The place you live in is stigmatizing the fact you have a record now, and
yeah,
you don't really have much opportunity. And housing cost is ridiculously expensive, and you can't even afford rent on a minimum wage
right,
job anywhere in this country.
right. And you
And oh, by the
probably,
way, healthcare.
yeah, and you probably have undiagnosed schizophrenia or personality disorder from trauma that was because your parents went through the same thing that you're now experiencing.
Yep. And like, what was it? We both learned about it in grad school. Is like that
Yeah,
idea of like where like people act as if money is not a precursor to success, where it's like,
right. Yeah,
no, there's a huge difference in outcomes
sure,
if you grow up in
sure.
poverty versus growing up with even a middle class or just a normal working class suburban family life,
Right,
even on the
right.
poor spectrum in suburbia compared to
I forget
cities.
I forget who I'm taking this from, but I listened to a podcast, a couple years ago, and it was a really cool story of a woman who escaped a really devastating situation in a developing country and went on to have amazing success. And she talked about remember hearing the first time someone used the term self-made, right? And she
Ooh,
was like, I don't understand how, because she's what people would call a self-made woman, right?
yeah,
And she was like, I don't understand this term self-made. No one's self-made. Everyone
yeah,
needs opportunity from other people, right? Like everyone needs help from other people. Everyone needs even people who are extremely wealthy, right? They have they have workers, they have employees, they have people who are working for them under contract and agree in terms of agreement, right? They have consumers who are
yep.
purchasing their products, right? Who trust their brand. So it was really interesting for me to like hear that from someone who had, a story that was the largest one of the largest claims to be called self-made that I've ever heard, just being like, no one is self-made. Everyone needs opportunity. To no one can start at zero, right? To
Well,
get away
somebody
from
started at zero, but that was the only person.
right, fair enough. Right. So you can't start at zero. You need two or more people to get away from zero. I think that's the thing, right? Like you can't I mean, I guess you can you can use a stick to whittle another stick if you're by yourself in the woods, sure. Like you can get away from zero that way, but like I think in the modern sense, I think there's no real way to get away from zero without cooperation, in society, right? So it takes at least two.
Yeah, especially like when we think about just then again, like tying in that more evolutionary perspective, which you did already, right?
Right.
We're mammals.
Yeah.
Every mammal is a social foundational creature. So like just
Right.
even the fact of just if we would take out economics, money, society, kind of these dogmas that dictate our life, if we literally just put a human on an island and say you got everything you want, they're gonna go crazy because you still need someone.
Right. Right. Yeah. You need the social input. Wired for it.
Unless, like you said, some type A stuff's going on. But like minus that, right?
Right, right. Totally.
Then you're not
Wow.
wired for it though. Like I said.
Yeah. No, absolutely. So,
It's an interesting thing, like, like because as we're talking about like this convergence of just all these different factors, it's something. It's funny because there's a quote in my head. I'm gonna butcher it because I tried googling it, I
go
couldn't
for it.
get it.
Sure.
It's a more political, economic quote, but it's that idea. Every every recession or I'm drawing a blank. What's the word essentially? The one we're giving something up, like every concession. There we go.
Concession. There you go.
Yeah,
Nailed it.
right. It just took a little while for the brain to catch up.
Yeah.
Every concession we make to power and privilege is a secession to our ability to fight for justice and this like underprivilege. And it's like
Mm.
that same idea where we're kind of hitting on where it's like there's only so much you can do because as you're giving up one thing, you're giving up another. Or
Yeah.
both you and I are Viktor Frankl fans, where it's like,
Right. Yeah.
that's kind of the
Well,
foundation.
I was thinking about that. I was thinking about him today, actually, in a sense of, you know, um, I hope if there were a if I was ever in his position, that I would have the courage that he had. It was like just this real existential spin-off thought that I was like, although he's the first to admit, he says in Man's Search for Meaning, don't call me a hero because the best of us didn't make it back.
Yeah,
Is what he said in there. And hey, fair enough. I think you've had enough impact, inspiring, countless millions after the fact, Victor. Seriously, it's my
absolutely.
hero.
No, for real. And like think about the courage it even takes to admit that, right?
Yeah,
Because we can all just make up 20 scenarios really fast where it's like there was probably a scenario where he probably didn't say stand up for someone, but he knew
yeah,
it was a matter of survival, right?
right,
And it's like that base instinct of just the fact that like maybe that person did want to die, right? And it's like the same idea of
yeah,
like suicide by cop, right? Like some people,
right,
that is actually kind of the easier way to go. It's just kind of go start the fire
right.
and be like, haha, now you gotta kill me.
Sure.
It's
Yeah,
over for you.
totally. It's like it reminds me of Ellie Weiss Knight. I don't know if you ever had to read that book in school. That was another Holocaust book, and she has a famous quote about
Oh,
you know God going up in smoke in the furnaces kind of deal the first time she
yeah,
arrived at a camp, um, and it's the idea of some of the people. The best people were probably dead before they hit the ground, if that makes sense.
they
You
didn't
know,
even make it.
yeah, yeah,
There's
it's
that one
wild.
famous photo. I don't know if you've ever seen it, where it's like it's at a Nazi rally, and there's just one guy standing there with like his arms drawn. What the fuck is happening? Is it really
Yeah.
happening right now?
The one person who in the moment looks insane, who was the most sane person there.
That and was he the only one who looked not insane, or was it more so was he the only one with the courage to show it?
Right, that's what I mean. Yeah, like he's the only one who lived in his values and was able to be like, "Hey, yo, what in the what is y'all doing, fam? What's going on here?" Well, I think one of the reasons I brought up, like, I hope I have the courage that he would have in that situation. It's more like because his whole in Man's Search for Me, for people who haven't read it, he has a manuscript, right? And he's kind of like a psychiatrist prodigy, Viktor Frankl. So he's this like young professional, prodigy psychiatrist who has his whole life in front of him and is in this the Vienna circle of all these renowned psychologists and of the emerging field of psychoanalysis and all this stuff. And he's got an idea about meaning and purpose and how to help people, and logotherapy is what he called it. And that's he talks about, I had to get through there because I had this thing that was bigger than me, right? I had this thing that was bigger than me. And I just hope that if I ever had a situation, that I'd come away, I'd face it with that there's something bigger than me that I need to keep going for. Because I mean, that's just so wild.
You know, this is random. I'm not gonna lie, but it popped in my head, and it's something we talked about earlier. Was like, and you brought it up, that idea of like kind of how we are now living in individual worlds because of this digital era, and it's really
Sure.
crazy to think, like in some sense, how would we actually know what's bigger than us today? Because,
Yeah.
like you said, we live
Yeah.
in different worlds.
No, it's so true. It's even like I'm starting to get like, I watched Fahrenheit 451 the other week, the one with Michael B. Jordan, the newer one. I don't
Okay.
know if you've ever read that book. It's another dystopian sort of book, but you would like it. You would really like it actually, because it's about sort of a society that starts burning all the books. Books are bad,
Ah,
right?
okay. I
Going
did
around
hear
burning
good
all,
things, right? Like,
yeah,
never heard
burning
anything
all the
bad about
books.
it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So it's sort of dystopian futuristic society where totalitarian government takes over, but their big gripe is with books. Anyone who's found with books is a fugitive, right, and a threat
We're
to,
screwed.
to society. Yeah, exactly, right. But it's a super technologically advanced society, and they have some kind of thing called the internet, right? They don't use those phrases because it wasn't sort of in the times of the internet. I don't think I don't know when Ray Bradbury wrote it actually, um, but it remind like I feel like that is more akin to where we're going than sort of like a 1984. I feel like it's Brave New World mixed with Fahrenheit 451, where it's almost like it's not that books will even be like banned per se. It's that they're going to be like slowly cast into obscurity because there's no like social pressure to like read these there's no agreement anymore upon about like what is important to read, right, or what's important information to store. Like, does that make sense? Like in 300, could you imagine, in like, because just at the rate of change of technology, like in 200 years, is the Holocaust something that is going to be read about the same way that all of the kids of the 2000s and 2010s had to read about it in school? Like, probably not, right?
Oh,
It'll probably
you're
be,
chartering
you
into
know,
different territory now. And I hate to say it, but
uh,
scary
oh
territory.
sure. It's terrifying. It's terrifying. But
Well,
the reason I brought up Fahrenheit 451 was because of that idea of just like books, right? Like, because I was thinking about, oh, like, Man's Search for Meaning. I'm like, how many decades is that book going to survive before it'll still be read? I'm not saying it's not going to be read or it's not going to exist, but I'm saying
we
like
don't speak in
with it.
absolutes. Only Sith do.
Right,
Let's be
right,
clear about
right,
that.
right, exactly. So, but like just on that trend towards individualism, it's like, well, what if, eventually it just gets to the point where someone's like, I don't want to read about any of that crap. It's too depressing.
Well,
It's like, oh,
so like, there's two things, right? So, ironically, like this is now bringing out my old, like what I kind of used to study, arguably, which is like political theory and macroeconomics. And like, one, just to start off real quick, say it out loud. Fahrenheit 451. Do you have a guess when it was written? Because I'm gonna assume you might. I don't know. I was surprised.
I think it's later than I thought. Um,
Gotta say
I don't
date
know
though.
how
Come
old.
on, round
I
number,
know,
something.
I know.
50,
I want.
60,
I want to
70,
go.
80, 40.
Yeah, I want to go like I'm thinking mid 19th century, like 50s or 60s, but I have a feeling it's newer than that for some reason.
53. Good guess, bro. Good
53.
guess.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I was like, I feel like I just read a whole box set of C.S. Lewis, who like goes like right up until that time. I was like, it wasn't that time. Like, because I was reading all his stuff. I was like, it's definitely not that time. So I was like, all right, it's after. I thought it might have been a little bit more recent than that but that makes sense. 50s, the post-war boom, technology starting to like be on the rise, and straight after World War II, um, Cold War pending. That gives like that, like thinking about the story, the book, and the movies in that context actually kind of makes sense how he kind of found himself in that story, in that world. Yeah.
Yeah. Like tying it in, right? Like so, like this is now. Whoo. I'll start by just saying, like, Noam Chomsky talks about this a lot, right? That idea of kind of the death
Yeah,
of, say, scholarship, death of, say, literacy, death of kind of this intellectualism, which we see all across
right.
our, at least Western, and now it's really going across the world, that anti kind of
Is
literacy and
that
anti science
is
rhetoric.
that manufactured consent? Is that his point in that one? I know that's like his one of his most famous ones.
So manufacturing consent would be more of kind of how the propaganda works, right? And like you
Oh,
can
okay.
even still
That's
watch
more
it
the
free on
communications
YouTube.
perspective.
Yeah, where it's like or
Right, got it.
systems.
Right, okay.
I would actually say more system than even communication. So it's kind of how the actual system operates. So like
Got it.
in say political theory, it's less about individualism, it's much more systematic. That's kind of that differential say between political science. Where political science will be like, oh, here's what the House of Representatives can do, maybe some historical factors, blah 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 blah. Nothing much more about the system. Political theory is going to be much more about those integral pieces. So, like, we can think Marx, we can think, say, Lenin, you can think, not Stalin, but like, technically Mussolini, and because he was actually a revolutionary in political theory, he's kind of one of the authors of fascism, not Hitler. Hitler was a
Right.
totalitarianist. Now we can just
Yeah.
keep going down all our founding fathers, right? So, like, they designed a system, and that's political theory. So like with Chomsky, like he has a couple books, like couple, but like in that he talks about that idea of that silencing of an intellectual culture. And really part of it is a concerted effort, right? Because just like in most dystopian novels, there's a ruling class. It's just the majority of
Right.
people who get effed. And like that's
Sure.
kind of the way he shows it.
Yeah. What's and then what happens too, right, is you know, silencing, but then there's silencing sometimes, but also shaping at others. What's the
Yeah.
Heidegger, the famous philosopher who was sort of then kind of later on sort of marred by like, oh well, he was a he was a Nazi sympathizer. Heidegger was, right, the German
Yeah.
philosopher, and it's like, well, was he? And I don't know this answer because I'm not really actually familiar with his work, so I want to put a big caveat here, but it's that idea of like, well, sort of was he censored of being sort of captured, and so he had to say what he had to say, kind of deal. Um, the best of us didn't make it back, kind of deal, right? Like he could have stood on principle and didn't. I don't
No,
know.
fair enough. And Einstein talks a lot about a lot of the philosophers, say, who were in Germany at that time, who kind of did that, right? Because of exactly
Right.
what you're saying, where it's like, if you don't, bye
Yeah.
bye.
Right. Yeah. Aren't
And
we great? Talk about how great our ideas are, won't you?
yeah. And mind you, this is now the other counterpoint, though, where it's like, where was he? Who was he? Right? Maybe he was in
Yeah.
those circles. Maybe he
Right.
really did believe the narrative, because in some sense, that's what fascism ends up being. It's not a
Right.
political ideology, it's more of a story we tell. And it's really
Yeah.
going to be engulfing, say, the system in more of a totalitarian style, typically, that then that's how it works. It's all emotionally
Right.
triggering. It's not much
Right.
actual ideology to it.
Sure. Well, and I think most of what we're starting to understand, even, talking about sort of core beliefs and like CBT and like we see that ourselves and other people in the world in these like mini stories, right? These YouTube shorts of core beliefs,
Yeah, true.
if you will, these like little condensed narratives that we have about ourselves, about other people, about the world, about whatever sort of object you even want to go to, right? We have our attitudes and beliefs that are encoded in many stories. It's pretty hard to break out of that. The
Well,
story sort of framework.
that's essentially what our lives are, right? Like if we
Yeah.
really think about it, that's all it is. It's not anything else. It's that perception of
Yeah.
how we go back and look at our life. Where if you go back and you just say everything was great, yeah, it's probably gonna be much better than if you said it was all shit.
Well, because we experience time sequentially, right? So like, there's no way of getting out of that. It's like we're trapped in it. My high school physics teacher, shout out Mr. D'Amato. I have no idea if you're doing okay or where you are, but you said this to me in 10th grade, and I never forgot it. He looked at our class, and someone asked him, well, like, kind of jokingly, like, well, what is time, right? Oh, what a great question to ask a physics teacher. And he just looked at everybody and said, "Time is what keeps everything from happening at once." And he put his chalk down on the on like the chalkboard holder thing and just walked back to his desk and sat down. Like everyone just like I think, since it was an honors class, there were plenty of people who were interested by that statement, but there were still people who were like, God, this guy's so weird. But
I'm just
I've
gonna
never
throw it out
forgotten
there.
that.
If he ever listens to this and reaches out, he's coming on here so we can just talk about how
Oh, I would
that
love
day
to.
went for him, because that'd be a boss day. Like, he went home and he ate dinner. He's like,
Yes.
guess what I said, honey?
Yeah, yeah, for real. He had a lot of funny little quirks. He once said, how like on like certain days of the month in different townships, they'll have like the days where you can leave out like furniture or like big
Oh,
items and
yes.
they'll like take them. So I forget whatever date it was of the month in my town that I grew up in, but he used to say, "Yeah, yeah, tomorrow's shopping at Kirby's." That's what he would say. We're going shopping at Kirby's tomorrow. Me and the wife, we're going shopping at Kirby's. And that was his term for going to just drive around town looking for like, stuff people were tossing and loading it in the back of the truck. Oh man. Yeah, great dude. Great dude. Really, really interesting. He made that class really fun and interesting. So,
That's what it
shout out
sounds
to him
like.
for that. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Wow. All right, I think we got to Mr. D'Amato. I think that means we're on our last legs here.
I would throw out one more point
Sure, let's
regarding,
do it.
say, that, like, similar to that Chomsky, or even like that idea around kind of the anti-science rhetoric, right? Like, because there's
Sure.
a couple other intellectuals who speak around this, right? And like,
Right.
it becomes actually maybe one of the main drivers of maybe today, right? Like, even in this
Right.
conversation, when we're sitting here talking about different points about, like, oh, how did we get here?
Right.
My personal opinion honestly goes around civic literacy, right? Like, the idea that
Sure.
most people, if you ask them how a law is made in this country, they have
I
no
know.
idea. Like,
For real. That's such a good point. Well, people don't know that. They don't know what the branches of the government are. They don't know what the sort of who's in charge of what in the three branches of the government. Like,
they don't
like
understand the
a lot.
president is not a king.
Right. Yeah, yes, and a lot of people mistakenly think that like the judiciary is supposed to make laws, right? Or that how
Yeah.
they rule on cases is yes, it impacts what laws are allowed, sure, but which feels like it's making laws, but that's not technically what it's doing. But people don't understand those like little things, like the basics.
Yeah.
I mean, like, and it's yeah, of course.
And like, that's kind of the point, right? And part of this ties into, I mentioned her name earlier, like her name's Naomi Osakis. She's at Harvard. And
Yeah, I
like,
think I'm familiar. I think I've seen her on a podcast
oh,
or
you've
something.
definitely seen this woman. I know you have, right? Because it's just something where a good example is she has one of her first pieces that are kind of big. It's a documentary we can all rent for, I think, like $3. I don't remember where it's streaming from, but you can just go to Amazon Prime and rent it from, the big conglomerate. And it's essentially called Merchants of Doubt, right? Like, there was a concerted effort by the smoking companies and oil
Hmm.
companies in the 70s, basically, they hired the Manhattan scientists to basically say, fight science for us because we're wrong and there's no other way to win. So we just have to act like it's not
So
real.
true. Right,
And like, we
right,
see every single principle from those tenets, and that is
right.
essentially our political arena today. It's our
Yeah.
corporate
Well,
arena, right? Like, it's how these people operate, which drives anti-science and anti-literacy. And like,
sure.
we have one big staple that we all in the science world can talk about, which is like anti-vax.
Right. But even anti-vax, I don't know if it's like I think we did
Based on a
that.
false premise. So let's put it that way.
Right, right,
Andrew
right, right. We did
Wakefield
the
lied.
Oh, of course. We did the concept creep too during COVID, right? Of course, of
Yep.
like, well, being anti-mRNA vaccine, you're an anti-vaxxer. Well, it's like, well, actually, I have every other vaccination, and so do my kids, right? So it's like, and I think tying into a larger point about when you talked about, yeah, we don't do generalizations, we don't do all or nothing thinking as therapists, right? I think tying it back into the internet, is that obviously with, sort of the polarization that social media does and conformity and, team ideas and slamming on people and like, cool, like I got my team, you got your team, and it pulls people into sort of conformist sort of camps that are hard to break out of. And then we have less and less people who are willing to stand on principle in the middle, and talk about the shades of gray, talk about, make even a small concession of like, I see your point, and like just doing that. If a million people woke up tomorrow and said that and just started saying that, I see your point, and I think the world would be a better place.
I I don't disagree one bit, and I would even go like my I would go even further. I think personally, like and like there's probably I would assume there's research out there showing this. I haven't looked. Isn't like social media the whole premise based around it on cognitive distortions and essentially like heuristics, like every aspect of it? There isn't really like almost all of it's based around that, which is the part of why,
Sure.
in my opinion, it's so destructive. Because in reality, it's
Yeah.
like if you're not doing it, no one gives a shit.
Yeah. Yeah. It's um the same circus that they put us in, right? It's hard to break out of, I need to I need to be a more impressive juggler than that person over there. So I'm gonna juggle four balls instead of three balls. And so in a silly way, we're all outrageously outraging more than the next guy or woman.
That
Shut up.
exactly, or it's the or like I'm just gonna say it. You're probably gonna get upset with me. It's okay. You'll forgive me.
It's okay, man. Yeah, of course I
All you have to
will.
do is go look at Elon Musk's Twitter and or X, whatever, and like the point
I
being,
love
like,
that guy.
and right, like he's this weird figure in popular culture and like
So
society
weird.
today.
Yeah.
But like if you look at his tweets, right, and like or
Yeah.
X's, whatever the hell they're called, the cognitive distortions or heuristics for anyone who doesn't realize it's like mental patterns or shortcuts our brain can take that distort reality and kind of elicit emotional responses and behaviors out of it because it's distorting our reality. So it triggers us on multiple levels anatomically and literally just creating irrational thoughts. And like the easy way to put it is go in there, go on his X, and like maybe we could just make an episode of it. Show me one that's not really him doing the normal 10 ones that we just know of, like all or nothing or overgeneralization or,
Sure.
jumping to glue. Like that's all he does. It's not
Right.
at all anything else.
Well, it's tough because I think there's a positive side to heuristics, right? Shades of gray. We operate in a world again of the telos. For people who don't know what telos means, it's kind of like, what is the purpose of a thing? We don't see an object, we see what it does. So when I see a book, I don't see the actual object for what it is. I see a thing that you pick up and you look at the pages in the middle and it tells you things, right? So again, so the telos of like heuristics is to make decisions quickly, right? To be able to make quicker
Yeah.
decisions. Now for someone who has somehow enough time to post on X all day, run SpaceX, Neuralink, X itself, and Tesla, right, and do all these things, it's important to make decisions quickly, right? That his whole life is making decisions quickly. His whole life is being is on the not on the fly, because I think it's calculated and I think his brain power is a lot more than mine. So no place to speak on that.
Walter Iscan would
Right.
say
But
different, who is his biographer.
right, fair enough. But at least I can see how he's found himself in that situation of
The problem
posting
is when you're
many
one of the
things that
five
fall
richest
into the
humans on
characteristics.
Earth,
Yeah,
that's the problem. You just
sure.
can't trust someone where his position is. And the problem
Right.
isn't that you can't trust him. It's that when wealth inequality is at the worst point in recorded history,
Mm,
the man who kind of controls one of the biggest engines of social consensus,
sure.
and then not only that, he's one of the most influential figures in the world
Right.
because of everything you mentioned and what he does. To sit there and do that is almost unresponsible, right? Because there's
Right.
millions,
I
if
will
not hundreds of millions.
I will add, a la Steven Pinker, that although wealth inequality is at a bad point since COVID. This book came out before COVID. Before COVID, wealth inequality globally was on the decline. But in COVID, I don't think it is anymore. But
COVID completely reversed it.
I know.
And like literally, right? Like it wasn't,
Yeah.
and the
But
decline
let
wasn't
me
even
just
that
add,
fast.
let me just add at least though that although wealth inequality, I'm sure, is growing in a pretty bad spot, that absolute poverty is lower.
But what would that be called?
What do you mean? What would that would be called?
There's a form of fallacy you're doing with that thought.
What, absolute poverty?
Hmm? Just
Well,
the
yeah,
logic of saying this thing that technically is probably the driver of a lot of our problems if we just correlate it to historical standards
right.
is okay because in reality this other thing that's not as important is going down. Because it would go down a lot more if we change that one thing, but like because it's going down enough.
Well, I mean, fair enough, but like I don't think that.
Slippery slope, by the way, is what that's called.
Sure, fair enough, but I think the point that I'm making is that a rising tide lifts all ships. It's a cop out of an argument in certain respects, and I understand that, but
But that
you don't want people who are drowning. So
I will just throw it out there. Again, slippery slope, because I don't agree with that premise. I don't agree with the statement, right? That comes from the 1980s and on. That comes from that individualistic culture, where historically, in almost all of pre-modern America and most Western countries,
sure,
that's not true. And it never has been, other than since the
what isn't true?
supplementation of that idea of like it lifts everyone, right? We call that supply side. You can say that's trickle down.
No, I'm not saying it I'm saying from a global standpoint of developing people coming out of absolute poverty, on living on less than $2 per day, $2 per
Oh,
day. That's what I mean when I say that.
oh no,
Um,
not absolute poverty. I'm talking about the idea that just because say some people or everyone's being lifted doesn't mean that it's not a say.
oh
We're not
yeah,
speaking
that's
absolutes.
not that. Of course, that's not an issue. It's 100%. It's a massive issue. I was just adding that prosperity is increasing. Differential prosperity is also increasing.
But it's a
So
cop out,
it's
right?
not
Because
though.
it is.
But I think the thing that you're doing is you're saying that, well, this cancels that out because it's more important in your perspective, which I agree. I think it's more
I would
important
argue
in
that
the
those
long
countries
term.
you're even talking about would be more prosperous if that other side wasn't there. Because in reality, those countries are mostly ridden from imperialism and colonization, which they're still dealing with the remnants of, and with
Right,
Western influence and Eastern influence right now from
right.
both countries. They're not looking to help them, but looking to suppress them even further, just
Well,
back to that standard.
one of the things I think, you know, and I think I don't know how much time we have left on our recording here. I don't know how to check that, but
Uh... You want to say 20 minutes? I think we have 20 minutes at least.
all right, let's go. So we're at 8:37. Let's go to like 8:45 ish. But
Okay.
the I'm failing to see, I guess, here's where I'm stuck. I'm failing to see how people rising out of absolute poverty is a bad thing.
No one said it was, because that's then a
Right.
dichotomy
That's what
that
I'm
you're putting
saying.
me
Yeah,
in.
yeah, 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 yeah.
No one's agreeing
It,
that it's
it,
not, but I'm
right,
saying that it's
right.
not good enough compared to how bad the other thing is. So if we're
Oh,
saying it's a weighted scale, one
oh,
side's up a little bit, the other one's
right,
just
right,
basically not even existent.
right. So you're saying it's abysmally, its importance is negligible. That's what you're saying.
And it's negligible
On that relative scale.
because what we're not saying in that moment is, of course, it's up. Global wealth is up. Everything's up
Right.
because literally that's
Sure.
just development. And
Right.
Thomas Piketty, who's the world's most famous economist from the Paris School of France, who wrote Capitalism in the 21st Century, most likely argues that in reality, yeah, of course they're richer because inflation, right? So like $2 today is not $2 that it was in 1980. So
Oh,
it might
sure.
look really good today saying $2 globally.
Well, they adjust those things for inflation.
Well, I hope so, God forbid. But it still doesn't equal out, right? Because those countries, yet again, we can just look at it. If it's a petrostate, we can look at those ones. They're worse off today because the global
Right.
wealth inequality there is just as bad. If we look at,
Right.
say, majority of countries around the world, are they
Right.
in better positions since 1980 when this kind
Right.
of idea that everyone benefits for certain things No.
I'm curious. I'm not going to run out of here and go get it in the other room. But so the what I'm using to base my things off is not sort of any sort of array of books, but Enlightenment Now by Steven Pinker, where he has a lot of graphs in there about
Hmm.
these different things, absolute poverty, even up until I think when that book came out, which I think was 2019. So I think it was right before the COVID pandemic. But I'm curious to even look at how he operationalizes the variables um, about wealth inequality. Um, yeah, that's no, that's an end quote. There's nothing else there.
No, look, and like I would say too, like for me, like I've never read it, so of course there's like
Yeah,
missing pieces for me, but it's one of those things where it's like it's really hard to find much corollary information that doesn't just look at one of the problems in the world that we can probably point majority of our problems on,
yeah,
and not just say like, hey, look, yeah, this one thing it's great, but it doesn't mean that that other thing is not more impactful, and it's more
right.
impactful for even the world, not just one person. And we're witnessing it on a level right now where there's a convergence happening. And even in our
Damn
field, right? We're
paywall.
watching
Sorry.
giant corporations come in,
Oh, it's
VC funded,
disgusting.
destroying our own industry too. And it's going to do the same thing they've done with every industry, which is gut, 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 take, 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 bottom line,
Yeah,
bottom line.
we advocated ourselves into targets.
Well, we
Look at
did
all
it,
these
but
people who look at all these people who are struggling. We need to help these people who are struggling. Don't mind if I take all of that.
and pay the person $30 a clinical hour with a master's
Right.
degree and 7 years of
You
school.
have, you have a master's degree and you wanna help people with their trauma. Here's minimum wage,
Yeah. It's
basically.
interesting. We can make a whole entire episode where me and you basically just go research our sides
Right, right, right.
and then come
No,
in.
totally. Well, I think that's what this was good for. It was like too, like today, where we got into a bunch of cool, different topics of things that we're interested in, and I think we found some grooves in there of flowing and going deeper into different kind of dynamics of
Well, I guess like,
society, psychology itself, and um, mental health. I think maybe not mental
well,
health
something
so much in depth, but
today was also just like that rambling day because like we've talked about, like one episode will be that research driven one. If it's mental
oh,
health
for
that day,
sure,
that's where we bring that fire. But in reality, on these ones, like we're probably gonna go wherever the wind kind of blows.
totally, totally. Yeah. No, man, this is great today. I had a really fun time. This is fun. Glad that
Yeah.
we're doing this.
Just wait until we're bringing up actual research with us because then it's going to get kind of like, I guess you could argue, it might get a little intense. I could see that getting like, no.
Well, and not all of it has to be debates. I don't, and not that we
No, it won't be
are
for sure.
necessary. Yeah, not necessarily that we're. I don't think we're. I think we're aligned on more things that we have different opinions about in general. Because no two people are the same, so there's always going to be some friction of where we have different perspectives. But I think even just researching things, coming
Yeah.
in and sharing what we found,
I,
just kind of with no a priori like hypothesis that I'm trying to support. Just like let's just go like find stuff. Because I think too the problem is like I mean, and everyone's guilty of this. I'm looking at you, all of you undergrads, right now, when people are like, use five use five research citations in your
yeah.
paper, and you're typing in the answer that you want from the research, and like Google Scholar comes up, it's like this is what you're looking for, right? Like not doing like a real lit review. You're just like, yes, give me a citation. That's a cool author name. I'll use that one.
I won't lie, I'm totally guilty of that, right? Like I've done that
Yeah.
way too many times.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
and
But
like,
even that's even an example of like how the internet is sort of facilitating that the unequal exchange of ideas is like just people are going to Google things based on their theories and probably find some research that you know uh, approves of what they're saying. Let's say it's a really well studied field. Maybe there's 4,000 articles that have a non-significant result, but there's 6,000 articles that have a significant result. It's like whichever you type in, you're getting, but you're not getting the whole story, right?
Connor, can we
So
just name what that's called?
what is that called?
confirmation bias and cherry
Oh, of
picking.
course, of
Or
course.
fallacies, right? Like
Yeah,
that is
I was
you're
going
hit
for
on it.
I was going for more from like the internet side of it. What is that called? I'm like, crap.
Well, no, like that's the that's the same way the heuristic would work is on the internet. You're looking for that information to support the
Oh,
argument or
sure.
that a priori kind of assumption right away.
Yeah.
And like the funny part is Lane Norton, for anyone who doesn't know, he's basically power lifter. He's going to be competing for worlds, set the past record for his weight class at nationals, and arguably probably one of the top like experts in protein synthesis in the country. And it's Dr. Norton, I should say. I'm sorry, but the idea would be right, like his whole entire hustle as an influencer on the internet is literally showing how influencers are doing exactly what you're saying. Like, go and Google, what do I want a study to say? Now I take that study. I don't show you the study or any of the results or
Right.
anything like that. But it's, look at this study that showed that literally this does this. It's like, wait, what? That's crazy shit. And then you look at it, it's 5 people you studied. One of them
Right.
had a result that was good. Like,
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
doesn't work.
Mm-hmm. Man, research is tough, dude. Research is tough. It's almost and people we can't even keep up at the rate that research is actually coming in. So
I would say this is a rabbit hole that we might be able to have a whole entire section on
oh,
because this is
absolutely.
where, like, in some sense, if we dig enough around this, there's a shift that happens in academia around that same timeline in the 70s and 80s where honestly, what happens? People with money start kind of influencing universities to make policies that make it seem like some things are good. And like there's
Sure.
actually just an educational shift that happens from that level too.
Well,
But then
even
we can
just
also have the
even just the research literacy part of it and understanding sort of like the file cabinet problem. Not all results get published. Most results don't get published, and what that actually really means for what information we have, and why journals are pay to play, and why things don't get published, and that that having money driven publishing is a terrible business model for society, because we need all of the boring results. We
yeah.
need all of the stuff that's in the filing cabinets. And just because something's not an interesting result does not mean it shouldn't be published and available for all researchers and scientists to have access to. So that's somewhere we can go too.
I would also
So,
even add further to your point because I support all the points you just said about that. And I'll add another one that we should really be making sure that the people who actually get to even publish stuff should be able to publish things and put that authority on it because there's a lot of publishers or publications
right.
that don't have that, yet they get
Sure.
credited as if they are equal to.
Right. That's a tough one. That's a slippery slope too, because I could imagine a jealous editor not wanting their rival to publish something.
Look, I'm glad we won't be the ones making that decision, but yes,
That's
terribly
just
difficult.
I just imagine some like bitter like editors like Christ, I taught him that, and now he get I was the one who made him interested in this theory, and now he's publishing the groundbreaking results, not in
There's
my
a person
journal.
in my mind who I'm thinking of who has a famous idea that they told us in grad school that was theirs and they never did anything with it. And like in my head, I'm thinking about saying it out loud, but I don't want to
Oh,
use his name. So we both know the person I'm probably speaking about right now.
Sure, I think so.
Does it kind of give like a analogy?
Sure.
It's how you start your day and then how you close your day.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
Like it's like
Sure.
that one where it's just like
Open
a
close.
great example where it's like we could totally just go steal that right now, claim it as ours, and that would be him sitting there like, what the hell?
Right. Yeah, hey, it's all part of it, but how do you want to wrap this up here? I think we had a really good time today. First time connecting in Commotion. I feel pretty connected. I feel pretty good investigating, talking some things out.
And like something to throw in there, like think about how much in here we disagreed at some points. That's okay. We're allowed to disagree because, like Connor said, we both have our opinions.
Yeah, and I think that is something that is going to be maybe unique about this podcast. Is we come from similar but different places and have similar but different ideas and perspectives.
Yes, sir. Not true,
So,
right? Like,
and interests. So that I think was also one of the things that we looked at was like, yeah, this is a good idea. Let's do this thing. So
100%
episode 1. How you doing?
done. What's up? um, I guess a little bit. We said that we're probably going to be publishing what every 2 weeks now,
Yes, I think that's the plan. That's the plan.
right?
Let's do it.
And like it was going to be the 1 week, maybe. I guess knowing this is the third or fourth week, so that second one, I guess, of the month would be where it's more of just an open discussion, kind of us doing what we did today.
Sure.
Of course, if there's any listening questioners or kind of things that they want to be brought in, definitely just reach out to us on our socials because that is always helpful. Otherwise, it could be then that first publication, most likely maybe the first week of the month, will be more informational. It will be much more us having a guided discussion around what we kind of bring to it from a research and kind of educational perspective.
I would say, in general, the purpose of what we're doing here is to have dialogue, to explore important topics, to be entertaining, to give information, and be educational, but also be a space and a home for people who are interested in doing that, interested in having conversations, and being able to stand on principle in the shades of gray in a world that doesn't see any shades of gray. So
That and like just to add on too, right? Like it's like I know we've spoke about it a little bit. Young men right now are struggling
sure.
to say it, right? Like suicide rates for them are 4 times as high for completion than compared to young women.
Yep.
Gambling, it's one of the most deadly diseases
Sure.
there is right now. From a suicide, it's an epidemic. Honestly, One in
Totally.
five at least try, and they're predominantly young men.
Yeah.
Most of the research out there is showing that young men are struggling heavily. And it's not
Yep.
with the idea of saying being a man, it's the idea of that meaning and purpose. And that's really where that's another thing we hope to add. It's just being two young men who are also in the field of mental health, which is already 1 in 5 of us are just men. And to be able to be vulnerable, authentic, and connect in a way that typically isn't shown for masculinity. And I think that's something else that we just hope to bring.
Totally. I think you hit the nail on the head there. I think we're especially in a place where most teachers, most counselors, therapists, people in the mental health field in general, and along within schools, as I just mentioned, are female, and we have a dearth of visible male role models for young kids, for people who are interested in growing, for people who are interested in thinking deeply, for people who are interested in bettering themselves, people who are interested in pushing themselves out of their comfort zone. And
Can I throw one in there?
sure, go ahead.
And people are just confused about what the hell is happening.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Exactly. That's the commotion. Exactly. And the commotion. So I hope you enjoyed our first episode. I know I certainly did.
Dude, I had a great time.
Heck yeah,
This
man.
is what I've been waiting for.
Yeah, for real. This is great. I love it. I love hearing the sound of my voice, as all of you will be able to tell at some point or another. So this was a really great time. Um, do a lot of listening. Now I get to do a lot of talking.
Yeah, right? Facts.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, I think that's a wrap on episode 1 of Connecting in Commotion. Follow me on X at Connor J. Mears, and I'll let Vince sign off here too.
Yeah, no, look, episode 1, success. Thank you everyone for listening and also just for being here. If you made it here, great. Thank you. And you can follow me at Vince Botto Jr. on X and Instagram. And feel free just to reach out. We'll love to hear back from what you thought about this. And if you are on YouTube watching, just remember to subscribe and like. And yes, everyone, you can watch us on YouTube and see our faces. Who knew that?
That's right.
Other than that, Con, any last words?
No, just go out there and stand on principle in shades of gray. That's what I'm taking away from it, and that's what I'm going to be thinking about this week.
Okay.
Cool.
I'll just say mastery comes through failure. So remember that.
That's right.
You got to fail to actually master something.
That's right. And expose yourself to the risk of failure. First, before that, that's even the harder part.
Wasn't that what tonight was?
Yeah, sure was. But we made it.
That's right.
All right.
It's done with.
Cool. That's right. All
We'll
right.
see everyone in about 2 weeks for episode 2.
Sounds good. Peace out.
See ya.